Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing today?
Good. It's a nice day out there today, I believe. I was out skating earlier this morning, and it was certainly nice and fresh in the morning, and looking forward to getting maybe back out there again.
There's some blue sky up there, which is something we haven't seen for quite a while. It's been pretty white/gray for quite a couple of weeks now. So it's sure nice to see the sun shining and a little less smoke up there. That was getting really depressing.
Indeed. Let the sun shine in, face it with a grin. Smilers never lose and frowners never win. Bruce, we have some information to smile about today. One of the things we'll be talking about, Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic, who is an awfully sharp guy, has come out with his list of the teams that have improved the most and the least in the NHL in the offseason. And to my surprise, I mean, he's fair-handed, but to my surprise, he has the Oilers fifth as the fifth most improved team, up 10 goals, according to his calculations, based on off-season moves, essentially the addition of Connor Brown and the deletion of Kailer Yamamoto, Klim Kostin, and Nick Bjugstad. That surprised me. I didn't think the Oilers would be rated that high. There's certainly a lot of unrest among a small faction, mainly among a small faction, if we're completely honest, of Oiler fans online who thought the Oilers should have been far more aggressive, buying out Warren Fogle and CC and maybe even Jack Campbell and making some major moves this offseason. So, that would make the Oilers the second most improved team in their conference, the Western Conference, after Dallas, who Luszczyszyn has as the most improved team in the NHL. And the most improved team, the Oilers, are in the Pacific Division. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about just a sad story. It's the wrap-up of Oscar Klefbom's NHL career. And I just found that super. You wrote a post on this. I just found it. In thinking about it again, I hadn't thought about it much. It's so sad. It's just super sad from a lot of perspectives. Among other things, Klefbom was injured badly enough that he had to leave hockey at a young age, and he's going to, those kinds of injuries that he has. We haven't heard. I hope that he's okay, but man, those kinds of things can haunt a former athlete for the rest of his life. And I suspect that will not be leaving Klefbom. The shoulder injuries that he had were significant. We'll talk about the signing of Raphael Lavoie, the new deal. We'll talk about the Oilers' goals scoring and goals against this season. And we'll also talk about a post I did on the most disappointing moments in Edmonton Oilers history. And I have the Vegas series 7th overall. Now, I don't know if you're going to agree with that, Bruce. You might not agree with that, but for me, this is a subjective thing, right? There's no way to measure disappointment, but for me, this is where it ranks. I'm really disappointed in what happened, and we'll get into some of the other bad moments as well, which were worse than this Vegas series for sure. But it's up there on the list for me. All right, Bruce, let's start off with the Raphael Lavoie signing. He signed a 1-year deal. What was it, $8.75 million?
Yeah, $874,125, I think it was. So let's just call it 874. I guess it's just about $100,000 above the new league minimum of $775, which many/most players in Lavoie's situation have been signing for in recent years as the salary cap continues to drive a big wedge between the top stars and the rank and file players, more and more of whom are expected to make the minimum or very close to it. All Lavoie did on the very last day was he accepted his qualifying offer. And his qualifying offer was based on his last on his contract figure on his entry-level contract, which was 832,000, I think it was, and because he'd been paid a couple of rookie signing bonuses before he even turned pro. Anyway, he got uh, a 5% raise on that was what took him to 874. And the assumption was the Oilers would sign him for the minimum, maybe give him a little sweetener at the AHL level, like instead of 70,000, pay him a little bit more. And Lavoie just said, "Oh, I'm just going to sign my offer. Why should I take less?" I guess is his thinking. And my thinking is that he wasn't thinking very clearly, because it's a drop in the bucket compared to how it might impact his future earnings. I mean, this is a guy who's right on the cusp of making it to the NHL. And this year for him is his platform season on which he will build his next contract. And the Oilers were never going to sign him for more than 1 year extension unless he was willing to sign 2 years at the minimum, which he shouldn't have been. But 1 year at the minimum is kind of the standard. And the problem is, David, that now instead of being on a level playing field with several other guys who are making the league minimum, placed himself below them on the call-up list. If they ever get into a situation like they did throughout last year, where they're anywhere close to the actual cap maximum or ceiling, they will call up Lane Peterson at 775,000, or maybe they won't even have room for Raphael Lavoie at 874,000. I mean, it's not much. But last year it was, that excess. In the case of Matthias Janmark making 500 grand over the minimum, they didn't have room for him. They had to send him to the minors. He had to wait a month to get his chance. And you notice even guys like Janmark and Derek Ryan accepted significant discounts on their pay grade this year to try and get in under these cap figures. Well, a young guy like Raphael Lavoie with, let me remind, 0 NHL games played to this point, taking a stand on a matter like that. I mean, hey, it's great that they're going to pay you more if you're in the NHL, but if you're not in the NHL, that's actually going to cost you a lot more than it's going to make you. If you're making 70 grand in the AHL because the team couldn't afford to call you up, you're pissing away money this year, and you're also, way more importantly, pissing away opportunity to show yourself, make your case that you're part of the long-term solution. And for whatever reason, I mean, he just signed for 75,000 more than Ryan McLeod did last year, in a similar circumstance coming out of his ELC. And McLeod took a bit of a bullet for the team. And this was a guy who'd, been on the team for well over a year by the time that contract, and, had established himself on the team. Lavoie has done none of that. So to me, this was a penny wise, pound foolish kind of decision by him and his agent. I think he got terrible advice here.
It's a knothead move. Mm-hmm. Like it's just a knothead move, Bruce. Like what are you doing? He's in a pitched battle. He is in a pitched battle, and here's the thing. If he doesn't make it because of this is the deciding factor between him and Lane Peterson. Right now, he and Lane Peterson and Drake Caggiula are kind of in a pitch battle for the 12th, 13th spot on the team. And there may only be 12 forwards on this team. I suspect that's where we're headed, with Bouchard and McLeod getting more than people expect, and maybe getting an extra year on the contract, each of them, because of that. But, Caggiula is making the league minimum, $775. And Lane Peterson is making the league minimum, $775. Now I can see Lavoie. The Oilers, if he gets sent to the minors, he only gets 70,000, and that's where the negotiation with Raphael Lavoie should have been. If you're going to grind the Oilers, why not? Okay, say to the Oilers, okay, how about 150,000? How about $200,000 if he's sent to the minors this year? That's where you should be fighting like heck for the extra dollars. If you're his agent, because that really helps the player. Then when if he gets sent down, he's not picked up by anyone else. It doesn't help Raphael Lavoie to basically tie a boat anchor to his leg in terms of making this team, where the money is going to be so tight, and where every dollar that Ken Holland spends now early in the year means he can spend that much less, accrue that much less at the trading deadline to bring in a player that the Oilers are going to really need. The Oilers have probably one big move they're going to be making this year at the trading deadline. They need every single dollar they can find, they can scrape together to get the best possible player in that moment. And he's just taken, he's taken, you know, it's not a lot of money, but just these small amounts of money make a huge difference. And ask Matthias Janmark about it. He was sent to the minors last year because he had a $1.25 million contract. They needed to get below the cap, and he didn't make the team because of his contract. And Matthias Janmark is a proven NHL player who, when he did come up, looked really good, especially defensively. You know, I don't know. I didn't watch the Condors on TV on the internet last year, but so I can't say how close Raphael Lavoie is. But we do see in the second half of the season he moved up. He started to score.
Oh yeah,
and he has a real chance with the Oilers. Doesn't help. Why did you do? I'd like to hear the reasoning. Maybe there's something we're not thinking of, Bruce. Maybe we've missed something.
Well, maybe they just didn't like what the Oilers were counter-offering. Now, I have to say I don't know enough about the AHL structure. I know that when they're on the ELC, there's also a limit to the AHL minimum of 70 grand. And for young players, I think it's more the veterans. The AHL recognized veterans that get the, $150, $200, sometimes $400,000 salaries at the AHL level, and the young guys tend to work for 5 figures. So I'm not even sure how much room they had there. I just think that he sabotaged himself, quite frankly. And even if the reasoning is, well, if I, they have to waive me if I don't make the teams, then some other team's going to pick me up. Well, maybe some other team that's looking at themselves, geez, we got guys cheaper than that here.
Oh, so you think that they might not be able to give more than 70,000?
Well, I'm not sure if it's 70, but I think there are restrictions on AHL salaries, and I'm not sure it's just during the ELC. Like all the ELCs seem to have a AHL
but he's not on his
of
ELC
70
anymore.
grand. But I think it extends a little bit longer in the AHL. But I honestly just don't know. What I've heard,
so
I see only older players that start making these significant sort of bonus, AHL level salaries if they don't make the team, like Seth Griffith and, well, actually, yeah, there's guys that are on these two-way. Yeah.
And I don't know the rule either, but by way of example, Ben Gleason is going to be earning, the Oilers signed this defenseman, he's 25.
Right.
He's going to get $425,000 in the minors this coming year. And so he's not that much more experienced. And let's see, Cam Dineen here, what's he going to get? Who's also 25. He's going to get 210,000. And Noel Hoffenmeyer, he's the third guy who's not that much older than.
Yeah.
1 second. His minor league salary is only 70,000. Hoffenmeyer. Oh no, that's Lavoie.
Because he signed an ELC.
No, he's out of his ELC, Hoffenmeyer.
He signed a 1-year ELC because Toronto had never signed him to
really?
an NHL class contract. They signed him an AHL contract. So the Oilers are the first team. Because he's 24, it's only 1 year, but his AHL component would be governed by that. And here's my solution.
Minor league salary is 82,000. Hoffenmeyer's 82,500.
Right. Okay. Calling original Posar. We need your help.
Yeah.
Ira follows the AHL, and he knows the CBA well, and I suspect he knows details about the I was going to say inanities, but I'll call them intricacies of the AHL bargaining agreement as well. When can a player, how much experience does he need before he can start getting decent money in the AHL? And is it an actual rule, or is it just kind of a tradition?
And I don't know if you'd call Hoffenmeyer's contract an an entry-level contract.
I think it's been actually designated as such.
Okay.
Because he had never signed. He was always on the Luke Esposito contract in Toronto with the Marlies.
So was like Desharnais' contract, the ELC, when he signed?
His I
When
think
he
he was
signed that
too old. He was
first pro
26.
contract? I
Hoffenmeyer's
see.
24.
Yeah.
So there's current contract, entry level, 1 season, 24 years old. It's, you can only sign a 1 year ELC, but the club's got some control going forward. It's not like they have to waive him next year because he's on his second contract. There's a little more leeway than that. But Hoffenmeyer is a pretty interesting player.
Yeah, we've talked about him and his
I liked him at
good
development
good point scoring, and he's a rugged player. Got in 6 fights last year, so he's an interesting guy. All right, Bruce. Let's talk about Dom Luszczyszyn's new article. And as I was saying, he's got the Oilers as the 5th most improved team in the NHL based on off-season moves, and top in their Pacific Division, 2nd in the Western Conference. And here's what he writes, quote, "The Oilers only made one addition this offseason, and it's a good one. Connor Brown comes in cheap and should fit perfectly anywhere in the team's top 9. He is a hardworking winger who can score and grind while being an asset at both ends of the ice. That's a sizable improvement from Kailer Yamamoto, who just wasn't working out in a top 6 role anymore. The rest of the team's improvement here is from Nick Bjugstad and Klim Kostin no longer being on the roster. Both are viewed as below average players, though Edmonton's actual improvement will depend on who the Oilers get to replace those players." So Dom Luszczyszyn is a Leafs fan who watched Connor Brown closely. And whatever else his analytics say, he strikes me as just a very sharp observer of hockey. And his enthusiasm for Connor Brown, it's not unusual among people who watch the Leafs or the Senators. There's a lot of people who like this player and the way he plays the game. So that's encouraging to me. But Bruce, I cannot agree with Dom on Kostin. Listen, he scored 11 goals last year in 57 games, and he did it on near 20% shooting. So people are leery of that number, that he, if he had scored, let's say, 5 or 6 goals last year, there wouldn't be the interest around him. But man, that guy in the playoffs, Bruce, he was one of the best two-way wingers. He didn't get a lot of ice time. I don't quite know why. But he was in terms of a two-way winger, that guy got the job done in the playoffs. He took his regular season, his two-way play in the regular season was okay, but in the playoffs it was really good. And so he trended up in a small sample size. More than that, though, teams are crying out for this kind of player, someone with skill who is not just tough but is intimidating. Klim Kostin is an intimidating hitter and fighter. I think he's one of those few players who kind of the opposition, they're really alarmed when he's on the ice because you don't know what he's going to do and he can hurt you. So teams are begging for this kind of forward, and for the Oilers to find one like found money and to let him slip through their fingers. This to me feels like the kind of a Pat Maroon-esque, maybe not quite that level of mistake letting Maroon go as they did a few years ago, but this is, I don't like, I know the Oilers had to do it because Detroit were willing to pay him more than the Oilers could afford right now. But I don't see Kostin as a below average player, and what he adds in terms of physicality, especially if Evander Kane was to be out, is it's significant for a team. It was big for the Oilers last year.
Yeah, his opportunity really couldn't have come any better when it did come, in the fact that it was Evander Kane who was out. And so they needed not just a replacement on the roster, but they needed that specific player type, a guy who could be a little truculent out there on the ice and bellicose even at times. And he did take the body. He did show up in the scrums. He did drop the flippers a couple times. He was a physical force out there. And he scored some big goals. I mean, sure, he shot the lights out. Maybe he had a couple he shouldn't have had, but, when you fire a wrist shot as wicked as his and you get it on net, it had a better decent chance of going in because he really did have a plus hard shot, and he scored a few goals. Sort of pucks bounced to him in the slot, and he just buried them. And in another year, maybe he doesn't bury so many of them. But I thought he did plenty of things that were pretty helpful. And the sad fact is that the Oilers now, with their big salaries, they can't even consider adding a guy for $2 million, and they can't consider keeping a guy like Nick Bjugstad or Klim Kostin if they're worth $2 million on the market, because they don't have that extra million. They need to get guys that, hell, they don't have that extra 100,000 for Raphael Lavoie, let alone an extra million over the minimum for a more established player. So that's two guys that they lost just because they flat out couldn't afford them. And really three when you consider Yamamoto got moved because they couldn't really afford him either. And I'll say this, Dom, in his list here out, he does not mention Devon Shore. And I guess that's probably not a player front of mind for a lot of people, but he actually too had a pretty good year. So we got Bjugstad, Yamamoto, Kostin, and Shore who are out. Now, here's an interesting little fact somebody pointed out on Low Tide's comments section the other day. This is the Oilers' goals for percentage leaders in 22-23. Number 1, Devon Shore, 65%. Number 2, Nick Bjugstad, 62.5%. Number 3, Klim Kostin, 61%. Number 4, Kyler Yamamoto, 57%. The 4 guys that were best on the Oilers for goals for percentage, which is a nice stat. It's not the be-all and end-all. This is 5-on-5. The Oilers outscored the other team significantly. With all 4 of these dudes on the ice, they're all gone. So to me, Dom's statement that the Oilers are improved, much as I like Connor Brown, they're going to. I do agree with the statement. It depends on who they sign to replace these guys, but they have a couple of holes to fill. And
I wonder if
maybe Holloway and Lavoie do it internally, in which case maybe we're golden. But these guys. These are the guys that were, I thought, underrated on their contributions to the team last year. The huge improvement in the bottom 6. Well, the guys who had good years in the bottom 6 earned raises, and now they're getting paid somewhere else.
Maybe Devon Shore still comes back on a league minimum deal. I mean, he in the second half he played well. Devon Shore was a good player in the second half, so I wouldn't be against it. Like if he's willing to sign a league minimum, why not? Bruce, the Oilers in their bottom 6. Okay, let's just start with Brown over Yamamoto. Kyler Yamamoto really had a weak year and then was worse in the playoffs. It's the 4th time in a row he's been worse in the playoffs than the regular season. It was, I think, time to move on. And this looks like a significant improvement. So for the bottom lines, they have Warren Foegele, Derek Ryan, Ryan McLeod, Matthias Janmark, Dylan Holloway, Raphael Lavoie. That's 6 players. They're the 6 front runners. And then they have newcomers, Lane Peterson and Drake Caggiula, and rookies, Xavier Bourgault and Tyler Tullio at this point. And I expect they'll bring in at least one more veteran player on a minimum contract. So I'm quite, part of me is I'm glad for the Bjugstad decision. I think $2 million is an overpay for that player. I liked him in the regular season fine. I thought he was not great in the playoffs, especially when they bumped him up to play tough competition. He wasn't fast enough or skilled enough on defense, but he wasn't the only center on the Oilers who was exposed on defense. Every Oilers center, in my opinion, looked really weak at times on defense, except for Connor McDavid in the playoffs. They all had terrible moments where they failed to cover players, and Bjugstad was one of them. So Dylan Holloway was a good center in college hockey. People, he's not really being mentioned right now as a 4th line center. But if you had McLeod and Holloway as your 3rd and 4th line centers, you have 2 big, fast, young players who I think can play center in the NHL. And I'm open. I like it, actually, if they've opened up a spot for Holloway. I don't think they did this on purpose. It's not their first choice, but if it comes out that a spot has been opened up for Holloway as a 4th line center, I also hear they think of him as a 3rd line winger, maybe even more than that. But if there's a spot for Holloway there, that's great. I think he's earned it. I think he's I like him as a player. I think he's will fill in and provide the two-way play that Bjugstad did at even strength. Will Lavoie fill in for Costin? I don't see it. There's a chance. He's just not he's not intimidating. Costin was an intimidating guy. Lavoie he could score if he got the same amount of ice time. Not hot. This guy's a scorer, so he might be able to score 11 goals or even more possibly if you got a regular shift and about 10 minutes a game. Like, this guy can score. So
he's a big guy. He can hit. There's truth be told, we just don't know what we have here yet.
Yeah.
And he's been so erratic on the while in the pipeline, where last year's extended stretch of excellent play in the 2023 portion of the season was definitely his longest stretch of good play, and maybe his longest stretch of good or bad play, but he had fairly long stretches of both over the previous years. The hope is that he's raised his game, that he's recognized what he needs to do and is now consistently applying himself and doing it. And the hope is that he shows up at training camp this year and still has that attitude and mindset of how he approaches the game, because I do think, he's a decent prospect with a good chance to help the team. But there's not going to be a lot of margin, even though they have to waive him if he doesn't make the team. There's just so little margin in there that they can't have a guy around who's not helping, who's feeling his way around. He's got to be able to come in and make some kind of a positive impact.
And as for Lane Peterson, I don't really know anything about his game other than he scored in limited games. He scored a goal a game in the AHL last year. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty good. But I think it was just 17 goals in 18 games. So, I don't know how he's going to fit. He's like, I think about 25 years old now, 26 years old. So maybe kind of a Ryan Patulny-esque hockey player is my guess. All right, Bruce. Let's talk about Oscar Klefbom. You wrote about him. Is it today? He's 30 years.
He's 30 years old today, July 19th, 1993. When the Oilers drafted him in 2011 in the first round, he was still 17 years old. So he had a long way to go, and and it took him a while to work his way, 2 years in Sweden, and then most of a year in the AHL, and post-trade deadline cup of coffee. And then year 4, he started to establish himself more as a full-time player. And that fall of 2015, Peter Chiarelli signed him to a 7-year extension at just under $4.2 million a season. And it was seen early as being very possibly to be a value contract. And he still had 1 year of his ELC to play when he signed that. He'd only played 77 NHL games, and here they're giving the guy $30 million. It's a bit of a risk, but it was a good risk. Like, he was trending well. And you know what, David? From 2015 to 2020, when his career ended, he led the Oilers, forwards or defense, in average ice time per game in 5 out of 5 seasons. Like, he was a workhorse. He played 22 to 25 minutes a night, when he was in there. And he made it look easy. He played all situations. He moved the puck. He wasn't an overly physical guy. He was in good position. He was a solid and improving defensive defenseman. And that's the other thing. We have no idea how good he would have got, David. He was 26 in his last season, and still he was up to 26 minutes a night by then. And he was big time on the penalty kill. He was running the power play, and he was playing a ton at even strength. And at that time, the Oilers had both Klefbom and Nurse, who projected as being their top 4 left side defensemen for years down the road, right? Because Nurse was In the spring of 2020, Nurse just turned 25 when he signed his bridge deal, and Klefbom at that time was 26, and it looked like, the future stretched out ahead of him. And you think 5 years from now, there's a pretty good chance both of them are going to be better at the ages they were. And then Klefbom went away. That changed Nurse's role within the team, and just also his role within the hierarchy of the team, the payroll structure of the team. They had to pay him as their number one D man, where before they kind of had a 1 and a 1A, and they both looked pretty good. And the other impact, David, was in trying to replace Oscar Klefbom on the team. Ken Holland had made several attempts, right? The first year he ran with the guys that he had. Chris Russell was about the best, and Slater Kook, and, players of that ilk that were really not top 4 level defensemen, with Russell at least having had the experience in the role. And then at the deadline that year, they traded, I think it was a 4th round pick for Dmitry Kulikov. So he didn't work out. So the next year, in the summertime this time, Holland makes the big trade, 3rd round pick, Caleb Jones for Duncan Keith, and his big contract that caused but the thing is, Keith was brought in to play 2 left D because he didn't have Oscar Klefbom, who should have been there. Had to pay a 38-year-old guy more than he would have had to pay his 27-year-old guy to play left defense. And then at the deadline that year, they brought in Brett Kulak in a trade for a 2nd round pick. And Kulak was 3rd pairing last year, but this year after Keith retired, he became the 2nd pairing D-man. And then this year at the deadline, when Kulak was, he was just sort of so-so at 2nd pairing, they traded a 1st round pick and a past 1st round pick and a good player in Tyson Barrie to bring in Matthias Ekholm. At least in this case, they brought in a guy that had more contract, that's going to solve the problem long term. Now, finally, they got Nurse and Ekholm, and you can say, yeah, they got a real solid top 4 on the left side again. They got 2 real good players. But in the meantime, Nurse has gotten that huge raise, and they've traded, not only have they gone through all these guys, they traded out a 4th, a 3rd, a 2nd, a 1st, and a prospect. They traded a lot trying to fill Klefbom's spot. You just think the alternate history, which is what I wrote about, just change one thing. Oscar Klefbom doesn't get hurt. How many ways could this affect the Oilers? And I just talked about the guys on the defense and how differently that could have evolved with a healthy Oscar Klefbom, and just a massive kick in the junk for the Oilers to lose their number 1 defenseman with 3 years to run on a value contact. And then the second kick in the junk was then having to manage him on long-term injured reserve for the last 3 years and being completely unable to manipulate and accumulate accrue space under the salary cap because of the vagaries of the LTIR rule. 3 years that they were stuck with this formerly very good bargain contract that wound up biting them in the ass. And it was just a horror story.
Yeah, it was maybe Chiarelli's best move. Turns out to be a move in the end. Well, it's not the contract. It's listen, the loss of Klefbom and Sekera. The knives are out, Chiarelli. By the end, people were convinced he could do nothing right. But this GM lost Andre Sekera and Oscar Klefbom in the 2017 playoffs against Anaheim to major injuries. And that Sekera was playing at such a high level of hockey. Klefbom was probably the best Oilers player in that playoffs against San Jose and Anaheim. That's where I had him ranked at the end. Leon Draisaitl really took a huge step up. McDavid wasn't that good. He wasn't great that year. He was mugged, of course, by Ryan Kessler. But Klefbom was outstanding, and he never was again that level of hockey player that he had been in 2017 playoffs after that shoulder injury. He just never got it together and played at the same high level, both on offense and defense, as he had played then. So even when he was here, his final 2 years, he wasn't the same player, and then it just ended his career. What got me, Bruce, I went through photos last night of Klefbom. I was looking at him, and I just went back in time, and that guy was the epitome of a Greek god. Like he is unbelievably handsome, well put together, built guy, and just the shining good health on this player and the optimism, you can get from he's your top prospect. And he came on and he worked his way up where so many Oilers defensemen didn't. And he was looking like he was going to be a real number one demon in the NHL. Him and McDavid and Draisaitl would be the key to this team for a long time. And it's just painful and sad to think about that lost opportunity from Oscar Klefbom. You mentioned Adam Larson left the team eventually, and that they were good friends, Larson and Klefbom.
That might not have happened like that.
Darnell Nurse's second contract, he would have gotten less ice time with Klefbom around if Klefbom hadn't been hurt. And Nurse might his contract would have been likely far more reasonable on that he's now writing out. So this just had huge repercussions for the Oilers. Hit the loss of Klefbom and the loss of Sekera. It led to 2 years where they were out of the playoffs, which brought in Evan Bouchard and Philip Broberg. And it's funny because Broberg, they almost look like twin brothers at the same age. When you look at the photos of Philip Broberg and Oscar Klefbom, and it's Broberg whose career is developing in a kind of a similar way to Klefbom, although now the opportunity isn't there for Broberg that it was for Klefbom. The door's not wide open. It was wide open for Oscar Klefbom. It is not. Broberg's going to have a tough time getting ice time, unfortunately. I would like to see them open the door for him as well. That's why I'm glad about Holloway maybe getting a chance here. I think that has to happen for young players. Yeah. But so we do have a player who can remind us at least, and hopefully will develop in the same way that Oscar Klefbom did. But as for Klefbom, I wish him well. I still have this. When his name came up, I was thinking maybe is it possible? Could he still come back? Could he still be an NHL player? I think that's unlikely.
Well,
but
for 3 years of his contract have all played down without him coming back, and now he'd only get a fraction of the money if he wanted to try and come back at this stage. So you'd have to think it's over, and it's a sad thing. I mean, he also said he wanted to be able to lift his kids one day. So hopefully he's able to do that. And I'm not sure that he has any kids yet, but he may not be sure either. He was a pretty popular fellow. But it was...
We'll strike that from the record.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, anyway, he was a very popular fellow. And he was... I think he was commonly enjoyed by most Oilers fans. There wasn't the division around this guy that there seems to be around so many of them. And it was just kind of a tragic loss to lose, such a key player at such a pivotal point, just when he was really blossoming. And it's a sad story. And as for Greek gods, I mentioned two of them in my fantasy post about a healthy Klefbom. I said he's got a body by Adonis and a shoulder by Achilles. Of course, Achilles' real problem was his heel, but that's there's at least a metaphor being referenced, was he had this one problem and the rest of them almost seemed perfect. Like 6'3", 215. Like if I was to pick a size out of the blue that I want a D-man to be, it might be that, right? But can skate, which he could do, and can pass and can think, and he had a lot of things going on, and he was Edmonton's first homegrown Swedish defenseman, which has always been a dream of mine, to have a team populated by Swedish defensemen.
Yeah. Well, when Klefbom was dipped in the river, his mom was holding him by the shoulder, evidently.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's it.
All right. That's a Greek myth that we're referencing about Achilles. Who's his mom? Thetis, I think. And was it her?
What was it? Huh?
Was it? I don't know, Bruce.
Okay.
Did they have that legend in Greek history about crossing the river to death? I'm not sure. Was it that river?
Oh, the river Styx?
Yeah. or that's
Yeah, no,
Egyptian.
this was a different. This is a different
Yeah,
river that had more life-giving
mythical healing
power.
powers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mythical healing powers. Exactly.
Yes.
Alas, our Oscar did not have them.
Yeah. Indeed. And when other players strapped on his equipment, they could not get the job done. All right. Bruce, let's talk about the goals for and the goals against. The Oilers could really score a lot of goals. Not so good at defending. My take is the Oilers' goal should be to slash 50 goals against
Mm-hmm.
this year. I think it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
That would be going from 3.1 goals against per game to 2.5 goals against per game. At their best times in the last few years, they've averaged about 2.8 goals against per game for long,
Even
long
that.
stretches of play. So I think it's entirely possible that they can do this with improved goaltending and improved defensive structure, improved defensive systems. What's your take? Do you think they can keep scoring at the same rate while slashing a significant amount of goals against?
Well, that is the next step for sure. I mean, the scoring has come up, 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 up. And in 2019, in 2022-23, they led the NHL in goal scoring for the first time in 36 years since the Dynasty Oilers of the 80s led the league in goals for 6 consecutive years by wide margins in every year. These Oilers also led the league by a pretty wide margin, 24 goals over second place Boston Bruins. So at the offensive end of the ice, they got things done and then some. And for, that's always the thing that, we're always looking at. Well, we got this little problem at fourth line forward, and how are we going to fit this guy? We got the guys that are going to put the puck in the net. So let's start there. And as you say, the next step is to keep the puck out of the net a little better. I like your 2.5 goal. I think 2.8 would be great. They got it even down to 2.8 goals against with the amount of goal scoring they have. I mean, they've proven they can go on lengthy winning streaks, which I mean that the last quarter of the season, the Oilers gave up 56 goals in 21 games. So that's a little under 2.8. And they went 18-2-1. But then in the playoffs, they had 6 out of 12 games where they gave in 4 or more goals. And I think they won one of those games. So, that's the big difference maker.
It was, Bruce. It was, and I'm going to get to this in terms of my bitterness about the playoffs, which I have. It was pathetic the way the Oilers couldn't defend a lead in the playoffs. It was unacceptable, and the whole team needs to think hard about what went on. I just don't blame the goalies. I blame them somewhat, but this was a whole team thing, and it was kind of embarrassing. Vegas came back in every single game, and that they won, and that's not acceptable. It's just to me they lost the playoff series they should have won because of weak defensive play. And if the players are taking that as a wake-up call, they should. If the coaches are taking that as a wake-up call, they should. And if they're not, they need to. They really need to. Like, it's not enough to say bad puck luck, shooting the puck, which was also real. There was some of that. This is a team that just unacceptable defensive mistakes cost them possibly a Stanley Cup this year.
Very possible.
And that's on them. If they want to blame anyone, don't blame the NHL. Don't blame your goalies. Blame yourselves for the way you played hockey, and blame the coaches.
Goalies are part of it.
Goalies are part of it.
Yeah,
blame the coaches for the system in place, which was a porous system compared to what Vegas did. So I think it's really possible, and I think they should aim high. I don't know if if they could hit the 50, slashing the 50 goals against, which would take them to 2.5 goals against, but that should be the goal in the regular season, and the goals for will come. I don't think they have to worry about that. What they have to worry about is being able to clamp it down when they get a lead.
The coaches always say, all coaches always say that if you look after defense, the offense will take care of itself. If you're winning the puck and whatever section of the ice, when you have the puck and you take it on the counterattack, you've got, you'll get your chances then. and you're, the Oilers have, well, they have some defensive issues that have persisted. They have other ones that have come up and gone up and down, like the penalty kill, which last year was kind of down. But as for the playoffs, I mean, my list of culprits extends from the coaching staff to the goalies, the defensemen, the forwards, the penalty killers, and the penalty takers. All those guys need to get their stuff together. Short list. Stay out of the box. Kill your penalties. Kill the other guys when they have penalties. I mean, that's sort of strength. But at the defensive end of the sheet, they just need a little step up in performance from most of the players on the defensive side of the puck. For me, from what I saw in the playoffs, like down the stretch, they were fine, and then I guess it was a steady dose of better teams. Like they didn't have any games against Anaheim or Arizona in the playoffs to fatten the stats up, and they held their own against the Kings, but then against the Golden Knights, they clearly fell short.
So Bruce, this segues to my post on the most bitter moments in Oilers history. And I have to say, first of all, that I had a brain glitch and I missed one of the main bitter moments, which was Carolina, the loss to Carolina in 2006. And I would have had on my list probably, definitely ahead of the Vegas series.
Mm-hmm.
The game one loss.
Yeah.
The Oilers were up 3-0, and Marc-Andre Bergeron and Andrew Ladd of Carolina barreled into Dwayne Roloffson, who was arguably the Oilers' MVP in this series, and knocked him out of the playoffs. Now, was the score tied at that point? Had they already given up?
It was already tied, yeah. It was like 6 minutes left in the third, and the Oilers had already blown that big lead. And then that happened, and then Ty Conklin came in as one of the rotating backups that Craig McTavish had going that year, where it was Roloffson starting and either UC Markkanen or Ty Conklin as a backup. And this night it was Ty Conklin, and he made a critical error along with defenseman Jason Smith in the last minute of play, where they coughed up a shoot-in behind their own net for an open net tap-in to decide a game in the Stanley Cup Finals. It was tragic, and it was a very painful loss in the sense that, not only did they blow a game that they clearly should have won, but they lost their goalie, Roley, who all he'd done in the playoffs, he went .929 against Detroit, .931 against San Jose, and .934 against Anaheim as the Oilers rolled through three favorites to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. But,
so I would have had that, I think, actually. I don't know why I forgot it.
Well, you mentioned Chris Pronger leaving.
Yeah.
And that was kind of me. That was the cherry on top of that whole bad situation. But that game one was when everything.
Yeah, I think he still would have left, even if they had won, it looks like. But so here's the list, and I'm going to insert the Carolina game one where I would have put it if I had been thinking straight in that moment. So number one, most bitter moment, the Gretzky sale, was just cost the Oilers. I think probably they won one Stanley Cup. I think they probably would have won 4 or 5 if Wayne Gretzky had stayed at Edmonton, and it kicked off the exodus of all the great players. If they had had an owner who wasn't desperate for cash, they would have won. I think instead of just one more cup, they would have won 4 or 5 more cups with that team, I believe. The New York Rangers won one of those cups, as a matter of fact, with largely. Okay, number 2 is the Game 7 loss to the Calgary Flames, highlighted by Steve Smith's shooting the puck in off Grant Fuhr's leg in the Oilers' own net in the third period. Number 3, I'm going to go, that's where I would insert the Carolina, Game 1 of the Carolina series. Number 4, this isn't a moment, but it's in terms of bitterness, being an Oilers fan, it's the decade of darkness is my number 4 on the list. It's hundreds and hundreds of bitter moments adding up to one big ugly slug of bitter. And so that's number 4. Number 5, Peter Pocklington's threats to move the team. People who weren't here in the 90s probably have no idea what this was like, but it was just ongoing
It was
year
terrifying.
after year after year of threats. And at the same time, Quebec lost their team, Winnipeg lost their team, and Oilers
And Hartford lost their team, and the Oilers were
heart
the only WHA team who didn't lose their team.
and would have lost their team, but smartly in negotiating a new lease with Peter Pocklington, the city of Edmonton included a clause that said before Pocklington could move the team, which he tried to do to Houston in 1997-98 to Les Alexander of Houston, they had to give Edmonton buyers the right of first refusal at $75 million. And to the rescue came Cal Nichols and the Edmonton Investors Group, and they ended the up and down tumultuous roller coaster ride of Peter Pocklington's ownership of the team, buying the team and securing them in Edmonton. So that whole bitter time, and they failed to make the playoffs 4 years in a row. He totally ripped apart the team, the great '80s team. So that's number 4 on my list. Number 5,
Michael Larg deserves a mention in this great saga of Oilers suitors. What a joke that was.
is that he was
Michael Larg coming to town. I think the only thing that topped it in Edmonton sports time was maybe that day that Don King came to town.
I can't remember if he
talked to Edmondites.
Edmondites.
Larg was a complete he was a complete phony. And he came, they gave him the grand tour, they gave him time in front of microphones, and he talked about his investors, which it turned out he didn't have any. And it was just a crazy time.
I think I was at that press conference. I was at the Gretzky press conference where Pocklington tried to make it sound like Wayne wanted out and this was a real trade. So we've had a couple of these hard to stomach press conferences. Number 5 on my list is Chris Pronger demands a trade. That was really, he had just signed that in coming to Edmonton in the summer of 2005, he signed a 5-year deal. The Oilers lost the series to Carolina, but it looked like the Oilers were set up to have a strong team for a number of years built around Pronger and Roley and this a really good core of forwards. And when he left, it all fell apart. It turned out the move was largely due to the unhappiness of his wife, Lauren, in Edmonton. You know, she's an American. She wanted to be in the United States, and he chose family over city, which is understandable. Number 6 on my list, Ryan Kessler interferes with Cam Talbot. It's a really bitter moment in the 2017 playoffs. Watching that goal again is shocking.
I couldn't even click the arrow.
It is shocking. It is shocking that was ever allowed. It was shocking at the time. It is more shocking now. They have since that time become much more aggressive in taking away goals. And there's just no way in the world. It's just how. Well,
there's 15 seconds left in a 3-2 game day. It's not like it really, in a tie series, it's not like it really had much impact on the outcome.
If you're a conspiracy theorist.
They did a 75-second review of that goal. I mean, that night, remember during the third intermission, and was it Rudy mentioned he grabbed his pad? And I went back and I watched the replay again. 75 seconds between challenge to dropping the puck at center, and all they looked at was, did Nurse push him in? Nurse pushed him in. Good goal. But Nurse pushed him in, and then he laid in the crease for 4 seconds, and he hung on Talbot's pad and forced his legs open while his teammates shoved the puck in there. And it was a horrible moment in a lot of ways. Like, as a fan, I almost felt violated by that, and violated a second time by the league that allowed it to happen.
I know there are fans who have given up watching hockey based on that incident. They just got tired of the NHL's officiating. And if you're a conspiracy theorist who believes that the NHL is stacked against Canadian teams, that goal has got to be Exhibit A.
That was the same series as What Do We Say to Corey?
Yeah, that is a disgusting and embarrassing call, and unforgivable. Absolutely unforgivable. They should have cleaned house at the NHL officiating and review office, war room office. Okay, number 7, the Vegas series, and I'll get into why just a little bit more. Number 8, the miracle on Manchester. This is when the Oilers were first a really great team in the Gretzky area, and in the 1982 playoffs, they gave up a 5-goal lead in the third period and lost 6-5. just shocking in overtime. Number 9, the Ryan Smith trade, which it was just the last time, the Oilers lost Curtis Joseph, Doug Waite, Bill Guerin due to contract concerns. We thought that might end. But in the spring of 2007, they were not very far apart. And there's still some, why did he leave? Why did he not take the money? There's still debate about this, why did Ryan Smith left, whether he actually wanted to go or, it's still not exactly 100% clear. But that really hammered a lot of fans. Ryan Smith was a fan favorite, unlike any other Oilers player after the glory era. People just love this player. He lost. There was a time he got shot in the face by a Chris Pronger shot and lost 3 teeth, and then came back into the game and set up a big goal in the playoffs of 2006.
Overtime. You bet.
So he was just loved, and he got moved, and that was devastating for many fans. And
Smith himself.
11th on my list, and this is more of my dislike of the NHL. That Smith was 10th because I've added in the added in the Carolina thing, which I forgot. And the 11th thing is the Adam Graves compensation. If in terms of getting screwed by the NHL, this is so laughable. Adam Graves was the heart and soul of the Edmonton Oilers at that point. 23 years old, great two-way center. He went on to score 50 goals one year for the Rangers that year, and he was a key player in the 1994 Stanley Cup of the New York Rangers. And what did the Oilers get in compensation?
Troy Millette. Troy Millette.
This is not to be critical of Troy Millette, but to be fair, it's just a non-entity. And a player at the time who was nowhere in the same class as Adam Graves. And this was the NHL. The NHL at that time set compensation for this type of free agent, younger free agents who were signed. And they gave the Edmonton Oilers Troy Millette for Adam Graves. It was one of the biggest robberies. And it wasn't perpetrated by another GM. It was perpetrated by the NHL on the Edmonton Oilers. And that really left a bitter taste in my mouth.
Somehow managed to lose Adam Graves as a free agent, but the compensation that they got, not to say it was a ripoff, but after the exchange, Adam Graves would go on to score 280 goals for New York Rangers, and Troy Millette would go on to score 1 goal for the Edmonton Oilers. 1 goal. He played 15 games. Graves almost played that many seasons,
Well, that wasn't good. Bruce, in terms of Vegas, I think the bitterness, for most fans, the bitterness, I think, has to do with the refs in the NHL. The ridiculously weak call on Philip Broberg penalty, the slashing of Alex Pietrangelo on Leon Draisaitl, and this one pitiful 1-game suspension that Pietrangelo got. He needed to be 2 at least, maybe 3. And then the circumstances around Darnell Nurse's fighting major that saw him get suspended for a game. Why was that even considered a fighting major? And why, could they not have waived that as had been done in the regular season at times? And those things have left a bitter taste for many fans, including me. But for me, it's more a sense like the Oilers just I thought they were the more talented team. They were the better team. And I think they got out-coached. And they got out-defended. 2 things happened. And they gave up a series they should have won. They should have won that series. And this isn't as dramatic as the miracle on Manchester loss, but it's similar. That was caused by shoddy defense, by not getting the job done defensively when you needed to get it done. And I just hope that this Oilers team recognizes that. I think that Oilers team tightened up somewhat, and that's what we need to see now. That's why I'm bitter about it. I just keep thinking about it. So,
yeah, I'm less bitter in the sense that I think they deserved to lose and they lost. I got way more bitter when I think they got screwed, like I do think still they did against Anaheim. Vegas got the better of them, and I'm disappointed about a lot of things. Not sure bitter is the right word. They just, and it wasn't like it came down to one goal. They lost in game 6, 5-2 on their home ice, and they just didn't seem to have any answer for superstar netminder Aiden Hill in nets for Vegas. And the Oilers couldn't get a lot of stops themselves. And, it was just, you add up a few of these issues, and the team that you'd think maybe the Oilers had a little edge on them. I mean, Vegas had 111 points and Edmonton had 109. So it's not like there was a lot to choose between them. But Vegas came through. I think they were healthier too, David, to be really honest. I think Hyman, Kane, McDavid were clearly nursing something during the series. Draisaitl, certainly after he was slashed, and some even suggest Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was playing hurt, and I'd even throw in the name of Matthias Janmark as a guy that the Oilers could have used in that series, but he was struggling with a couple of injuries of his own and not much able to help out, and they wound up with not enough players at their best to get the matchups that they probably needed against Vegas. They had to put McDavid and Draisaitl together, for example, where maybe the better system would have had them on separate lines, as one example. And Kane being very ineffective was a big part of it too.
Yeah, he was been injured all year, and Hyman was clearly injured. I'm not so sure about McDavid. I don't know about McDavid, and Draisaitl
Doughty got him, and McDavid was clearly not just full skating for about 6 games after that. He was getting better towards the end of the Vegas series, but there was a while that he was, he still found his way to get his points, but he was not dominant and not beating guys one-on-one the way he routinely does. And part of that was system, but part of that was McDavid just maybe being 90%,
Dirty Drew. Hope they don't play the
I'm going to smack him if I got a chance. He did. And Draisaitl got the penalty for tapping the knob of Doughty's stick after Doughty kneed McDavid. Say no more about that.
All right. So there we go. Anyway, Bruce, we're waiting for the McLeod and Bouchard contracts to be signed. We haven't, no offer sheets yet. Fortunately, we'll see what happens.
There won't be any on McLeod, but and his he got the very last date for arbitrator, August 4th. So the Oilers still have a couple of weeks to negotiate with him and avoid that process. And there are different schools of thought as to which of the two guys they'll sign first, but they got to get them both done.
Yeah, that'll be the last business of summer, I guess, unless although they could bring in still, I think, a forward on them, or two even, but a forward, at least one on a minimum contract. So that may be done. Thomas Nosek had been talked about, but he just signed with New Jersey, so that is off.
What did he sign for?
I'll have to look it up, Bruce, but I didn't. Thomas Nosek contract, cap friendly. He, I don't really know the player, so I can't. Looks like 1 million, Bruce, signed for $1 million. Okay. So the Oilers, he just clearly, I'm sure the Oilers could have offered $1 million. He just probably wanted to play for in the Eastern Conference. I mean, he played in Boston, so it's not surprising that he stayed in the Eastern Conference. He had played for the Vegas Golden Knights for 4 years, but
yes. I remember him as a Golden Knight, but and a pretty good defensive player and not much offense, and so I mean the Oilers got Matthias Janmark for $1 million. I'm not sure that I would trade Janmark for Nosek, to tell the truth.
Well, that's exactly right. Now Nosek plays center, but the Oilers do have options at center. Holloway can play center. Derek Ryan can play center. So even if they don't bring in another center, there's players who are experienced center icemen who could take on that role. Well, Bruce, let's leave it there then. I think we've covered the field.
Waterfront.
Yeah, we'll be digging into prospects soon. I've sent out the prospect list to myself, you, Kurt Levins, and Jim Matheson, who's also participating. I think Jim's already voted.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we'll be ranking the prospects, and that's what we'll be digging into throughout August.
Mhm.
Bruce, thanks for talking today.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.